My culture's not your costume, unless you're a raver, in which case it's perfectly fine. Apparently, how dare Indians claim your pashminas? I come from a long line of proud Indians, all of whom are practicing Hindus. My great grandfather was a freedom fighter, one of Gandhi's most devoted followers and revered friends. He spent his entire lifetime fighting for India's freedom from British rule. I'm a first generation American Indian, and my culture has been appropriated. I understand that America is considered to be the melting pot of all cultures, a place where, in theory, people of all races and backgrounds come to be themselves. But this has become a place where people blatantly rip off other people's cultural aspects, things that the original owners have faced hundreds of years of oppression for. Afro-Americans are harassed for wearing their native hairstyles in schools, but when Kim Kardashian wears box braids, she's at the forefront of fashion. Indian mothers in supermarkets are given dirty and condescending looks for wearing their bindis and their salwar kameez in public, but Red Rocks goers can open their third eye with bindis whenever they would like. Cultural appropriation is a significant area of study due to its relevance and arguments made by Miss Tanika, which will be exemplified in an excerpt from her speech, The Stigmas of Cultural Appropriation. This is a topic that's very close to me due to my background and my own experiences of watching my culture be treated as a fad. I like to think, rather optimistically albeit, that the appropriation of cultures comes from not knowing where the line is and not malicious intent. As an Indian and a practicing Hindu in Boulder, I see my culture and background exploited on a daily basis. There are many items of clothing and religious practices that I see people openly appropriating that I've been bullied for and marginalized for growing up. I think that's where people start crossing the line, and I think that minorities have a responsibility to speak up about their cultures and what's appropriate and what's not. Culture appropriation is outlined by Richard Rogers in A Culture Exchange to Transculturation, a review and reconceptualization of cultural appropriation, as the use of a culture's symbols, artifacts, genres, rituals, or technologies by members of another culture in 2006. The appropriation of cultures is very different from the appreciation of cultures. And I think that if more people understood the distinction, we wouldn't have as many social discrepancies. I think that the most prevalent issue in this entire discussion is how cultural appropriation and racism are more correlated than people are willing to admit. America boasts a really proud history of being a land free from oppression, free from judgment, but after a closer look, anyone would be able to see that this is not the case. People every day are marginalized for celebrating their ethnicities and racial backgrounds. American has very quickly become a synonym for white, and anything that doesn't fit in that constraint is either teased or stolen. Stahl and Meadows wrote in 2018 in their piece Cultural Appreciation or Cultural Appropriation that cultural appropriation is a byproduct of imperialism, capitalism, oppression, and assimilation. Imperialism is the creation and maintenance of an unequal culture, economic, and territorial relationships, usually between states and often in forms of an empire based on domination and supporting other people. Imperialism functions on subordinating groups and extracting anything of value from these colonized territories. In the case of cultural appropriation, culture is treated as a natural resource that is extracted from people of color. There are many people who have come forward and spoken about this topic, namely people whose cultural identities have been stolen or people who see no wrong in their actions. A young girl from the Shrewsbury International School spoke on November 8th, 2018 about cultural appropriation. As a multicultural student, she spoke about the interest in the study of cultures and how different elements of her identities collide. TEDx Talks are localized conventions developed in order to bring the community together to discuss issues prevalent in today's society. The following section has been taken from Tanika's speech in order to show the impact of cultural appropriation and how relevant it is in today's current social climate. Before I begin to give my speech today, I would like to highlight many of the themes and categories that I will be exploring, such as race, religion, and culture. They're all social constructs, which means that we as a society are the ones who put labels and categories on them. This is linked to cultural appropriation because, as in many other cases, one idea will begin to arise is how one group enforcing these labels on another creates this construct. I also believe that we have the power to eliminate them and this is the idea of my talk. For those of you who keep up with fashion, I'm sure you would have heard of the 2019 Marc Jacobs Spring Collection runway show, where he had high-end models like Gigi Hadid walk down his runway adorned with fake dreadlocks. This, of course, stimulated many angry calls of cultural appropriation, as dreadlocks are symbolic of the language of Judah and historically worn by many African Americans. This was particularly problematic because Jacobs did not credit the original source of hair and instead tried to present it as his own idea. The result of this was chaos, as we see many divisions in some African Americans as well as people from the rest of the world. If I were to give you an example of every time a phrase was misstated or an action was somehow linked to the idea of cultural appropriation, we would be here for the rest of time. The truth is, as our technological systems are advancing and our access to the world via social media expands, we begin to see more and more posts and comments that all have something to do with cultural appropriation. But how many of you know exactly what it is? According to the Oxford Dictionary definition, cultural appropriation is the inappropriate or unacknowledged adoption of customs, practices, and ideals by one group of people directed towards another. As exemplified in Thonika's excerpt, cultural appropriation is a delicate subject due to its convoluted boundaries and ever-shifting practices. Today's discussion about cultural appropriation, supported by Thonika's work in The Stigmas of Cultural Appropriation, hopefully cleared up some of the lines between the acceptable actions of cultural appreciation and appropriation. By collectively respecting each other's cultures and working towards an understanding, we can avoid these discrepancies and give rich histories and practices the reverence that they deserve. Thank you.